Hey guys, Logan here from Popular Woodworking Magazine. So for the last several months, I've been kind of moving shops from the basement into the new shop. And one of the things I discovered about myself, and I knew it, but I didn't really want to say it, is my hardware drawers, where I keep all my screws, my nails, fasteners, extra hardware stuff, were an absolute disaster. And I'm sure you guys kind of know what I'm talking about. I had a bunch of these plastic bins in my drawers, and they're just full of random screws and fasteners. So I'm kind of taking this opportunity of moving into a new shop to get myself to organize my hardware and my fasteners and really narrow down what I use in my shop. Because in reality, I probably only use 2 or 3 different size screws. So there's no reason for me to have literally 45 of these bins with different pieces of hardware in them. So as I started looking around on what types of screws I should really stock in my shop, I came across McFeely's, which is an online retailer of fasteners, and I found an interesting PDF on their website. And I'll share a link to that below, but I want to kind of give you a overview of what it said, because it made a really compelling argument for what type of screws you should have in your shop, and more importantly, what type of drive that those screws are. But first, let's talk about different types of screws, because not all screws are created equal, and not all screws work well for a woodworking project. First of all, we're not even going to talk about drywall screws, because those are, they're drywall screws. They're not for fastening pieces of wood together. The main types of screws that we're going to find are going to be screws similar to these guys. So a lot of the screws you'll find at a big box store are going to be similar to this. They'll be fully threaded from the tip all the way up to the head. The other type that you might find, and more than likely they'll come in a little package, something similar to this. Instead of being a anchor bolt or toggle bolt, they'll be screws. They'll be labeled as wood screws, and those only have threads about 2/3 of the way up. That is the type we want to use for woodworking. The main problem with this type of screw, with the threads all the way from the tip to the head, is if your 2 pieces are not held together perfectly when you start driving that screw, you can get what's called board jacking. And that is where the screw threads actually separate the pieces of wood and don't allow them to suck down together. And I know I've done that, and I'm sure you've done it too, where you drive a screw, you see there's a little bit of gap, so you drive a little bit more, but the gap stays there. That's because the threads are locking both the top piece and the bottom piece in position and not allowing them to pull together. Something like this guy, which is threaded only partially, is much more apt to pull that joint together. Because the threads are biting into the bottom piece and there's no threads on the top of that screw shank, it allows that top piece to be sucked down tight with the threads on the bottom to the bottom piece of wood. So when we're looking at the different types of screws, we're really going to be looking for that type that just has threads about 2/3 the way up. Now, the other thing we want to look at, and this isn't something that I really thought about till I started reading the McFeely's PDF, is the type of drive you use. Now, I know that we all are probably aware that there is a hierarchy on how easily a screw will strip out. Slotted screws strip out the easiest, followed by Phillips head, and then you get into some of the more specialty drives like Torx and square heads. And that's what I want to talk about, is what type of head you're choosing for your projects. And the one that I am going to start switching everything to, based on this McFeely PDF, is a square drive screw. And there's a couple of reasons for that. First, square drive bits only come in 3 different sizes. So if it fits and stays on there, it's the right size. I don't know how many times I've grabbed a Torx bit, which is that little star-shaped bit, and it kind of fits in the screw and you can get it to drive in, but if you need to take that screw out, you've probably stripped it out already. So only having 3 sizes with that square drive really is beneficial when you're selecting your driver and your screw type. Another thing that I really like about this, and this isn't something I thought about, but when you put a screw on a square drive bit, it stays in line with the axis of that driver. So when you're driving that screw, it's driving in straight no matter what angle you have the driver at. It's not something I thought about, but now that I do think about it, that's pretty logical. There's not many times where I need to drive a screw in my shop at an angle off the axis of the driver. Now let's compare that with a Torx bit. The Torx bit, which is those star-shaped bits, when you put a bit on there, it has a tendency to sag down. And that's because these guys are really designed for the construction market, where you might be driving screws at an odd angle. If you're building a deck, you need to get a screw in a tight spot. That's what these guys are designed for. That bit has a little bit of rotation around the back end of that screw, which works well for construction, doesn't work so well in our woodworking projects where we do need to drive that screw in straight. Now, and I alluded to it a little bit earlier, the other thing is these Torx bits are available in a bunch of different sizes. So you can end up with a handful of different bits in your shop. You might be grabbing the right one for your screw, you might not be. I think Torx bits come in like 6 or 7 different sizes, where the square drive bits only come in 3. So one of the other things that I like about square drive bits that I think make them a little bit more useful in the shop than other types is that that square drive head and that square drive bit is universal across brands. And that seems like an odd statement, but some manufacturers with their Torx bits will actually add little nubs to the end. So they seat a little bit better on their brand of screw, but it doesn't seat as well on other brands. But that square drive bit, as long as it is a square drive of the proper size, it is universal across brands. The other thing that I do like about that square drive bit is that if those corners get a little bit rounded from years of use, you can actually grab this guy to your grinder, just touch it up a little bit, and then it freshens up the bit. Now, the other thing to think about when you're looking at screws is screw length. The rule of thumb that I use is I always go 1/4 inch smaller screw than what the thickness of my material is combined. So if I have 2 3/4 inch pieces of material, that's 1.5 inches. I'm probably gonna grab 1.25 inch screw. So I think using this, I'm gonna be able to clean up a lot of the different hardware bins that I have in my shop. I'm gonna narrow everything down, I think, to 2 or 3 different screw sizes. They're all gonna be square drive. That way I only have 2 drivers in my shop, and I'll have one in my driver all the time ready to go. And I think it's gonna lead to a little bit more efficiency in my shop and a little bit more enjoyment.